Dr. Deepa's class was there. Okay, because of her knack work, I am engaging. Monday, instead of my class, she will engage. Okay. So there is slight change in the timetable. You remember me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
What class I have
Yes,
taken?
ma'am.
What class I have taken? What class I have taken? Forgotten. Yeah, very good. Okay. So keywords in physiology I have taken. So today my topic is homeostasis. Okay. Homeostasis. That is a very, very important word in physiology. So let me share my slides. This slides are visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So today my topic is homeostasis. You might have heard this word. Any idea? Any guess about this? What is homeostasis?
Maintaining
The constant
Maintenance of constant internal environment.
body temperature with this.
Yeah. Okay. So you have the basic idea. So whole physiology revolves around this word. Okay. So everything, physiology is nothing but, as I told you in the last class, it is the maintenance of normal functioning of body, isn't it? So the normal functioning of body is possible only when there is a homeostasis. Okay. So these two things are interconnected. To function normally, each and every organ has to be in a constant environment. There should be a constant internal environment of the body under which all body functions will be working properly. That is normal physiology. Okay. So this is about the homeostasis. Okay. Now coming on to little bit history about this homeostasis. So you must remember this French physiologist, that is Claude Bernard. Okay, so 19th century, he has first coined the word milieu interior. Okay, so the meaning of this milieu interior is internal environment of the body. Okay, so he has first coined the term milieu interior. So all of you might be knowing that the life has evolved in water, isn't it? So like unicellular organisms, okay, they don't have proper organ system. Okay, they are unicellular organism. They are directly in contact with the water, and directly they used to take the nutrient from the water, and directly they used to pour their waste product into the water. Yes or no? This is how the life has evolved. We know this. Now, during evolution, as the organisms has become more and more complex, okay, they have become multicellular. Now, human being is the most advanced, isn't it? The complex body system. So we have different systems in our body. Okay, so cells has become the tissues. Many tissues forms the organ system. Okay, like that the body has evolved. Now, to work each and every cell, that basic environment, that is the water surrounding the cell we need, isn't it? Okay, for that the nature has evolved the fluid in our body. As you know already, you have just now listened to the class, how much body water we are having? Yes, anyone?
60%.
Yeah, 60% of the body weight. Okay, not 60%, 60% of the body weight we are having water in our body, isn't it? Okay. So in that, again we have intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. Yes or no? And this extracellular fluid is considered as milieu interior. You agreed? Okay. So each and every cell will exchange. Okay. It takes nutrient and it pours its waste product and it exchanges with the intracellular fluid exchanges with the extracellular fluid and it remains constant. Even though whenever there is some disturbance occur, again by immediately these two systems they will exchange and it tries to keep the constant internal environment. Okay, so is it clear? So Claude Bernard, he has coined the term first milieu, interior, and the meaning is constant internal environment. And he told the extracellular fluid is considered as milieu interior. Okay, so intracellular fluid, by exchanging with the extracellular fluid, it tries to keep everything in a normal, constant values. Okay, then in 1929, one more American physiologist, that is Walter Kennan, he coined this term that is homeostasis. Okay, the meaning is maintenance of nearly constant conditions in the internal environment. Okay, so these scientists, at least you must remember, they have done a lot of contribution in this topic. Okay, so first is Claude Bernard. He has coined the word milieu interior, and then the Walter Kennan, he has first demonstrated the concept of homeostasis. Okay. So further classes you will be reading hemostasis also. Don't get confused with homeostasis and hemostasis. What do you mean by hemostasis? Anyone? Hemostasis?
I mean, is a process of
Yes.
bleeding.
Yes. Yeah, stoppage of bleeding. Okay. So even that mechanism also you'll be learning in the physiology of blood. Okay, but don't get confused. Homeostasis is maintenance of constant internal environment, and hemostasis is stoppage of blood clotting mechanism. You will learn there. That is hemostasis. Okay. Now coming on to the how the okay, how the internal environment is maintained. Okay, so why it is required to maintain a constant internal environment? Because the normal functioning of the body requires the integrated action of cells, tissues, and organs, and the multiple nervous, hormonal, and local control systems. So, all these things will contribute to the homeostasis. And any derangement, okay, if our body or our organ system or tissues, okay, will fail to maintain this normal, constant internal environment, that leads to an dysfunction of that particular functioning functioning and that lead to disease. Okay, so hence the disease is considered as state of disrupted homeostasis. If homeostasis is disrupted, it leads to an disease. Okay, next coming on to again the definition of homeostasis. So it's an ability to detect, change, activate mechanism that oppose it and thereby maintain relatively stable internal conditions. Okay, so that means the definition will become homeostasis is the maintenance of a relatively stable internal environment. Okay. When a stimulus or change in environment is present, then the feedback loops respond to keep system functioning near a set point or ideal level. So how this homeostasis is maintained? It is maintained by several feedback mechanism. I will be telling you in further slides. Okay. So it is maintained by so many feedback mechanism. Whenever there is a stimulus or change in the environment occur, that will be sensed by the receptors, and by the various feedback mechanism, it tries to maintain the normal range, that is normal homeostatic condition. Okay. So now this is the mechanism of homeostasis, how the feedback mechanisms will help here. Okay, it is the mechanisms of neural and hormonal control, regulatory mechanisms, and feedback is a situation when the output or response of a loop impact or influences the input or stimulus. So this is the meaning of feedback system. Feedback means when the output or response of a loop impact or influences the input or stimulus and try to keep. Suppose this is the stimulus here, initiation event or stimulus. Okay, whenever there is a stimulus, the variable may increase or decrease. Okay, depending upon the type of stimulus, depending upon the variable. This is a general mechanism. Okay, so whenever there is a stimulus, the variable will change. Okay, change in variable will occur. That is, the variable may increase or decrease, and this change in variable will be sensed by the sensory receptors. Okay, so this change in the variable will be sensed by receptors. Okay, then this change in variable information, okay, will be processed in the receptor and it is sent to the control center. Okay, so control center is usually in the central nervous system. Okay, usually in the brain. So the receptor will send the information through the afferent pathway or sensory pathway to the control system. Control system or brain will analyze the information. Okay, and accordingly it will send inputs, okay, output, information to the effector organs. Okay, effector organs, and accordingly the effector organs will act how whatever stimulus they will get from the control, accordingly they will act and they will try to bring back. If the variable has increased, it will try to decrease it. If the variable has decreased, this system try to increase it. Okay, totally it try to maintain it in a set point. So for everything there is a set point in our body. Yes or no? Like body temperature is very critically maintained. Okay, what is the normal body temperature? From 96 degree Fahrenheit to 98, isn't it? Okay, so 2 degree difference range. That's the range. Okay, if it is more than 98, it is called as hyperthermia or fever. If it is less, it is called as hypothermia. Okay, both the things the body system will be disrupted for the normal functioning of our enzymes. Okay, and other activities, normal body temperature is required. So if the temperature increases, I will be telling this again in the positive negative feedback mechanism. Okay, so here, this is the overall concept you must remember in feedback system. Okay, to maintain homeostasis, many feedback mechanism will operate, and this is the mechanism of operating feedback. That is, whenever there is a stimulus, change in the variable occur. This change in the variable will be assessed by the receptors. They will send information to the control center. Accordingly, the control center will direct the effector organs or target organs to act, sorry, and the desired change in variable will occur and normal set point or normal constancy in a body parameters will be maintained. Okay, is it clear? This is the mechanism of feedback mechanism. Now, in what all regulations occur in our body, okay, and in what all compartments we need regulation. So we need water balance. This is very, very, very important for normal functioning of body. You might have heard if it is very loss of too much water, dehydration may occur, isn't it? If there is a too much intake of water or retention of water, okay, that may lead to the again a disease condition. Okay, isn't it? Hypervolemia, okay, edema may occur whenever there is a imbalance. So water balance is very, very, very important. Then the salt concentration is also very important. Electrolyte and ions for normal functioning of our cellular metabolism. We need a proper electrolyte and ions. And acid-base balance, you also know this. What is the normal body pH? What is the pH of our blood?
7.4.
Yeah, 7.4 is the normal pH. So if it is decreased, again there is a lot of acidosis occurs in our body. If it is increased, alkalosis will occur in our body. Again, the normal functioning of the body will not occur in this condition. It has to be maintained strictly at 7.4 for normal functioning of the body, isn't it? And even the normal blood sugar level. As you all know, the normal fasting blood sugar level is 80 to 120 milligram, isn't it? Per DL. That has to be maintained for proper functioning of our body. So this is also regulated by this feedback mechanisms. Okay. Then nutrient levels also has to be maintained. Otherwise, it is considered as malnutrition. Or if we will not eat same food or same calories per day, okay, isn't it? We will be someday will be eating more protein, someday will be eating more fat, whatever it is, but whatever is extra, it is stored in the liver, isn't it? And again, the normalcy will be maintained. Okay. Then temperature also has to be regulated. As I told you, the very narrow range is there. Okay, in that range only the temperature has to be regulated. If body temperature increases, the mechanism will increase to decrease the body temperature, and if body temperature decreases, the mechanisms like shivering and all those things will occur to increase the body temperature, ultimately to maintain the temperature. And chemical levels like PO2 levels, PCO2 levels, every hello, please switch off your audios. It is causing disturbance. Please, I request all of you to off your audios. Okay, if I ask something, you can on and answer, and immediately you off your audios. Okay, then oxygen level. So now this corona pandemic, you might be knowing the importance of oxygen saturation, isn't it? Okay, so that is decreasing in this infection. Okay, it has to be around above 90% oxygen saturation, yes or no? Okay, if it is below 90%, then the cells may suffer from hypoxia. Okay, that has to be maintained above 90%. Okay, and carbon dioxide level also should not increase. It has to be maintained at a certain set point, and even the protein. So all these things has to be maintained in a normal levels. Okay, normal range. Okay, for all these things, we need homeostasis and feedback mechanisms. Okay, so our body will be continuously exposing with a different condition. Environmental conditions will not be equal always. Okay, even though there is a change in the external environment, these homeostatic regulatory mechanisms try to maintain normal, constant internal environment, and that is needed for our normal functioning of our body. Okay, so now I think you understood the importance of homeostatic mechanisms, isn't it? Now, how it is controlled. Okay, so this can be disrupted by many external stimuli like heat, cold, lack of oxygen, pathogens, and toxins may try to disrupt the homeostasis, and internal stimuli like body temperature, blood pressure, concentration of water, glucose, salt, oxygen, okay, physical and psychological stresses. These are the internal stimuli which may cause change in the variables, but our body mechanisms, feedback mechanisms tries to keep it back into the normal range. Okay, so these are the stimuli, okay, external and internal stimuli that may cause the feedback mechanisms. Now, as I told you, there are five components in the feedback mechanisms. That is, variable produce a change in the body functioning. Okay, then because of external stimuli or internal stimuli, there is a change in variable will occur, and the receptors monitor the environment and responds to the change. Okay, and it sends impulses to the control center, isn't it? And control center determines the set point at which the variable is maintained. Okay, so determines what to do, whether to increase the variable or decrease the variable. Then the effector organ provides the means to respond to the stimuli. It is a cell or an organ that respond to the command of control center. The response then feedback to influence the stimulus. Okay, then the influences the stimulus and tries the variable to be in the normal range. Bring back the variable to the normal range. Hence, the feedback system consists of a cycle of events in which information about a change is fed back into the system so that the regulator can control the process. Okay, so it is a feedback system is a cyclic event, okay, in which the information about change in the variable is fed back into the system so that the regulator can control the process. Okay, so now this is the diagrammatic representation. So in health, okay, so balance is maintained. Okay, that is homeostatic control mechanism. Okay, so here there is a balance in everything. Okay, so normal functioning of body is maintained here, but whenever there is an imbalance occurs in body body parameters, okay, either it might be blood pressure or body temperature or whatever it is, okay, then the receptor will sense this imbalance or change, okay, and the impulse will go to the center, control center, and control center and tries to maintain this balance. This is the overall control mechanism of homeostasis. I think it is clear to you now. Okay, so now, so feedback mechanisms are of two types, that is positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops. In positive feedback loop, change in a given direction causes additional change in the same direction. Okay, so in positive feedback mechanism, change in a variable, for example, increase in a variable will lead to further increase in the variable. Okay, that is called as positive feedback loops. Example, increase in the concentration of a substances causes feedback that produces continued increase in the concentration. You just remember, I will tell you the examples in one few further slides. Okay. So positive feedback mechanism is given change in the given direction causes additional change in the same direction. You remember these words. Okay. And then in negative feedback, change in a given direction causes change in the opposite direction. Okay. So if the variable is increased, then ultimately the feedback mechanism is to decrease the variable. Okay. If variable is decreased, ultimately the feedback mechanism is to increase. Okay. So here the opposite direction, change in a given direction causes change in the opposite direction, and many of the feedback mechanism in our body are negative feedback mechanisms, and they are very important in maintaining the homeostasis. Okay. Example, increase in the concentration of the substance causes feedback that ultimately causes the concentration of a substance to decrease. Okay, that is the meaning of negative feedback loop. Is it clear? So there are two feedback mechanisms, that is positive feedback mechanism and negative feedback mechanism. In positive feedback mechanism, change in a change in a variable causes again change in the same direction. Okay. Whereas in the negative feedback mechanism, change in a given direction causes change in the opposite direction. Okay. So you remember these things. Now, coming on to the what are the major differences between these positive feedback and negative feedback mechanism? So as I told you, negative feedback mechanisms are most frequent mechanisms in our body. Okay. And negative feedback mechanisms exhibit negative correlation between stimulus and response. Okay. Stimulus and product or process. There is a negative correlation. Whereas in positive feedback mechanism exhibit positive correlation between stimulus and product. Okay. And less associated with stability. That is, positive feedback mechanism is less associated with the body stability, whereas negative feedback mechanisms are closely associated with stability. Okay. And here in positive feedback mechanism, it enhances the change. As I told you, change in one direction will cause further change in the same direction. So it enhances the change, whereas in negative feedback mechanism, it resists the change. Okay. And in positive feedback mechanism, there is a wider range. Whereas in a negative feedback mechanism, there is a narrower range, like the blood pressure measure range, temperature, okay, range of our pH. So there is a narrow range in variables. Okay. And in positive feedback mechanism, it may be associated with a vicious cycle, and if it is not stopped, interrupted, it may lead to the death. That is positive feedback mechanism. Whereas the negative feedback mechanisms are most often associated with restoring homeostasis. They are okay, their functioning is to maintain the normal homeostasis. Okay, to control the homeostasis. Okay. So this positive feedback mechanism may require external interruption or the end, stoppage of that process, termination of the process, whatever is occurring here does not require external interruption. Okay, so these are the major differences between positive feedback mechanism and negative feedback mechanism. And negative feedback mechanisms are most frequent in our body, and they are needed in maintaining the normal homeostasis of our body. Okay. Next is some of the example of negative feedback mechanism, like our body temperature regulation. So as I told you, our normal body temperature is 96 degree Fahrenheit to 98 degree Fahrenheit, 98.4 degree Fahrenheit. So it has a very small range. Okay. So whenever body temperature drops, the hypothalamus initiate several physiological responses like vasoconstriction to conserve the heat, okay, to retain the heat, and shivering occurs, okay, to produce more heat, okay, and adrenal glands will secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. So all these mechanisms try to bring body temperature to the normal level. Okay. So whenever hypothermia occurs or body temperature decreases, these are the mechanism which occurs in our body to maintain the normal body temperature. Okay. Opposite to this, whenever the body temperature raises, okay, so the hypothalamus initiate the mechanisms like vasodilatation so that the heat loss will occur. Okay, and sweat glands, sweating and evaporation cools the skin. So these mechanisms tries to bring back the body temperature to the normal level. You understood? So these are the example for negative feedback mechanism. So as the temperature decreases, the mechanism to increase the temperature occurs. That's what the negative feedback mechanism. Okay. So response is opposite to the stimulus. Okay. And ultimately it is to maintain the normal set point, maintain the normal homeostasis. Okay. So this is one of the example of negative feedback mechanism. Okay. Now another example is exercise creates metabolic heat, okay, which raises the body temperature. Okay, so that acts as stimulus. Cooling mechanisms such as vasodilatation, that is flushed skin and sweating occurs. So whenever you run and come back, you will sweat, isn't it? And you'll hyperventilate. So all these mechanisms takes place to bring back the body temperature to normal. Okay. So this is another example for negative feedback mechanism. Okay. So one more very important physiological mechanism is to maintain the normal blood pressure. So as I told you, normal blood pressure of our body is systolic blood pressure is around 90 to 120 mm of Hg, and diastolic blood pressure is around 60 to 90 mm of Hg. That has to be maintained in that range only for proper functioning of the body. Again, with age and sex, there are some variation. Okay, let it be. So whenever there is an increase in blood pressure occurs, okay, there are so many mechanisms occurs in our body. Okay, so the nucleus tractus salutatorius, NTSS, okay, stimulation occurs, okay, that may lead to autonomic nervous system, okay, so that may cause inhibition of vasomotor center and stimulation of cardiac inhibitory center. Okay, so this vasomotor center is inhibited means it inhibits the sympathetic nervous system. Whenever sympathetic nervous system is inhibited, so blood vessels will be dilated. Okay, vasodilation occurs, and adrenal medulla, there is a decreased secretion of catecholamines occurs, and this further in your classes you will be learning detail about these regulatory mechanism. Okay, don't worry now about this. You just remember this is one of the example for negative feedback mechanism. This itself we will take 3 classes. Okay, that is blood pressure regulation. We will be covering you in detail. Don't worry here. Okay, just you remember here, whenever there is an increase in body temperature, increased blood pressure occurs, sympathetic nervous system will be inhibited. Ultimately, the blood pressure will decrease, and reverse occur when blood pressure will decrease. Okay. So whenever blood pressure increase, our body mechanism tries to decrease it. Whenever it decreases, our body mechanism tries to increase it. Okay, you remember this much. Okay, at this level. Next, another example is blood glucose regulation. Okay. So as you already know, the normal blood glucose, fasting blood glucose is around 80 to 120 milligram per DL, isn't it? So Not whenever there is an increase in the blood glucose occurs, what happens? Yeah, our pancreas will secrete more insulin. Okay, and the glucose, excessive glucose is converted into glycogen and it is stored in the liver and normal blood sugar level will be maintained. Okay, whenever there is a decrease in the blood sugar level occurs, okay, there is a inhibition of insulin secretion or stoppage of insulin secretion and glucagon, that hormone that is opposite to insulin, glucagon hormone will be released. Okay, it causes conversion of glycogen to glucose. Whatever glycogen is stored in the liver will be converted into glucose and it is released to the circulation. Again the normal blood sugar level will be maintained. Okay, again this will be dealt in your future classes. Okay, don't worry here now. Okay, so just you remember, whenever the blood glucose increases, insulin will be released. Okay, and excessive glucose will be stored as a glycogen and normal blood sugar level will be maintained. Whenever blood glucose level decreases, then the glucagon will be released, glycogen is converted into glucagon and normal blood sugar level will be maintained. Okay, if there is a decreased secretion of insulin, or then the excessive blood sugar will not be handled. Okay, and if the receptors for insulin action are not working properly, again the insulin action cannot occur. That leads to the very famous metabolic disease, that is diabetic mellitus. You already know this, isn't it? So the hyperglycemia, any derangement in this homeostasis occurs, then you may get hyperglycemia or hypoglycemia. Okay, so this is about one of the another negative feedback mechanism that occurs in our body. Okay, so most of the negative feedback mechanisms will occur via this route, that is hypothalamo hypophyseal neural tract. Okay, so hypothalamus will secrete many of the releasing hormones. Okay, hypothalamus releases. So one example here I have taken is hypothalamus releases TRH, that is thyroid releasing hormone. Okay, thyroxine releasing hormone. So hypothalamus will release thyroxine releasing hormone. This thyroxine releasing hormone will go and stimulate our anterior pituitary to secrete TSH. Okay, that is thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, so this TSH will go and stimulate our thyroid gland to secrete T3 and T4. You might be knowing this already. Then the level of T3 and T4 will act as a negative feedback mechanism. Okay, so whenever the T3, T4 level increases in our blood, it will go and inhibit TRH as well as TSH. Okay, and try to decrease the T3, T4 secretion. When T3, T4 secretion will decrease, okay, so there is no inhibition, then TRH and TSH will be released and that will stimulate your thyroid gland and T3, T4 level will be maintained. This is one of the very important example for your negative feedback mechanism. And many other hormones, I will be giving you the list. Many other hormones will be maintained by this mechanism only. Okay, so hypothalamo hypophyseal neural tract. Okay, so hypothalamus will be releasing many of the releasing hormones that go and stimulate anterior pituitary to secrete the specific hormones, and that, okay, and that will go and act on their target organs. Okay, so this is also one of the example for negative feedback mechanism. So all these hormones will act by this mechanism only, that is T3, T4. I have shown you with diagrammatically. Even the cortisol. Okay, cortisol releasing hormone secreted from the hypothalamus, that okay, will lead to secretion of adrenocorticotropic hormone from the anterior pituitary. This adrenocorticotropic hormone will go and stimulate our adrenal cortex to secrete the corticosteroids. Okay, this is again a example for negative feedback mechanism. And all our gonadal steroidal hormones like gonadotropin releasing hormone, okay, will be secreted from our hypothalamus. That will lead to secretion of luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone from our anterior pituitary. These will go and stimulate our ovaries and testes in males to secrete the sex steroidal hormones. Again, they will act like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone will act as a negative feedback mechanism for this axis. Okay. And likewise, the insulin growth factor 1 on insulin growth hormone, releasing hormone is secreted from the hypothalamus that causes release of growth hormone from the anterior pituitary. Okay, then calcium on parathyroid hormone. Okay, will act by negative feedback mechanism and leptin on hypothalamus. So all these things you will be learning in detail. If possible, you just remember their names. Okay, so all these hormones they will act maintained their level by negative feedback mechanism in our body. Okay. Now coming on to some of the example for positive feedback mechanisms. Okay. So one of the very important example is parturition reflex is an example for positive feedback mechanism. Here what happens? The uterine contractions are initiated whenever the baby moves into the position and it stretches the cervix. Okay. And the feedback increases the strength and frequency of contraction until the baby is born. So this stretch will lead to further increase in the uterine contraction, and again the uterine contraction will lead to further descent of the head of the fetus, further stretch, and uterine contraction will increase. So this cycle goes on till there is a delivery of the baby occurs, till the expulsion of the baby occurs. Once the baby is expelled, this positive feedback mechanism will stop. That's what I told. Positive feedback mechanism is change in one direction will lead to change in the same direction. Okay. And here the range is bigger. And here some interruption is needed, I told you, isn't it? Interruption here is birth of a baby. Birth of a baby, everything will stop. This positive feedback mechanism will stop. Okay. So if it is not stopped, okay, the contraction is going increasing, but it is not possible for expulsion of a baby to occur. There is some malformation. Then what happens? If it is not interrupted at proper time, the death of the patient may occur. Okay, that's what I told in the differences between positive and negative feedback mechanisms. Okay, so this is a diagrammatic representation of the same reflex. So what happens? As the head stretches the cervix, okay, then the stimulus will cause increase in the contraction, uterine contraction. Again, the contraction becomes stronger. Again, it lead to the descent of the head, and again it lead to the more stretch. This continues, goes on increasing with contractions, and finally the expulsion of baby will occur. Okay. So even the milk ejection reflex is again an example of positive feedback mechanism. Here, as the baby feeds, its suckling stimulate the breast. Okay, promotes further release of prolactin, resulting in yet more milk production. As the baby will be sucking, the touch receptors around the nipple will be stimulated. More amount of milk is released. Okay, like that, this process go on increasing. This is again one more example for positive feedback mechanism. Then another one example is enzyme cascade hypothesis, that is coagulation mechanism. Just to remember the name, mechanism of coagulation you will be learning in your future classes. So coagulation mechanism is again one of the example for positive feedback mechanism. Others are LH surge before ovulation is again a example for positive feedback mechanism. Hodgkin cycle is release of sodium. Okay, increase release of sodium when action potential occurs. This again you will be learning. Okay, just to remember the name. Hodgkin cycles that occurs during muscle contraction is again a example for positive feedback mechanism, and even the activation of digestive enzymes. Okay, so these are all some of the positive feedback mechanisms. Okay, so this is the diagram showing the coagulation mechanism. Okay, this is one of the example for positive feedback mechanisms. Next is, if homeostasis will go wrong, what happens? Okay, so body temperature has to be maintained. I told electrolyte balance has to be maintained. pH has to be maintained. So if it is hot, it may lead to the irreversible shock. Okay, if it is too much cold, body temperature decreases, whole metabolism of our body may stop. Okay, if it is dry conditions in our body, then blood transport stop, wet blood pressure is high and nutrients are diluted, acidic and alkaline metabolic process cannot occur, high or low electrolytes, then transport, metabolic process, and nerve conductions are affected. So these are all derangement occurs if the homeostasis is not maintained properly. Okay, so now you might have understood how much important it is the normal physiology in our life, isn't it? To maintain the normal homeostasis is very, very important in maintaining the normal functioning of body and normal maintaining normal health of our body, and derangement in this homeostatic mechanism itself will lead to the disease. Okay, so this is my contact information. If you have any doubt, you can mail me or ask me directly. Okay.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, you said due to the excess contraction in uterus, the patient can die. So at that time, if she is sent to hospital like proper time, so C-section can be the option.
Yeah, that's what I tell. Some interruption, so that particular doctor has to immediately assess. Okay, contraction is occurring, but baby is not, head is not descending. Okay, that is called a cephalopelvic disproportion. Means